Wonderful. So let me actually, okay, I'll start just welcoming everyone. We're glad you could meet me today. There is a lot, as I say, a lot of events, finals. And I'm Francesca Grippa, and I'm a faculty of business strategy and entrepreneurship, and also the executive director of the Lab for Inclusive Entrepreneurship here at Northeastern. This is the first part of a new series on entrepreneurship, and is open to all current students, alumni, and also the Inclusive Entrepreneur Fellows. The mission of our lab, which is just two words so that to frame who is hosting, is to contribute to economic development through a promotion of inclusive innovation. So we are very grateful for a couple of grants from Kaufman Foundation and the Economic Development Administration, which is part of the Department of Commerce, for supporting our lab. And so we really are incredibly happy and fortunate today to have Kevin O'Brien. He was former CEO and now chairman and co-founder of the email security company Great Horn, which was sold to private equity in 2022. So congratulations. And in addition to serving on several boards, Kevin mentors and works with early stage founders on strategy, entrepreneurship, and leadership development topics. And this is also great. Kevin is also a mentor in residence at Techstars. So maybe some of you will meet him there as well if you work with them. Over the past 15 years, Kevin has held multiple senior executive roles in Boston area startups, including roles in QAS, which was acquired by Experian in 2004, Contact Networks, which was acquired by Thomson Reuters in 2007, and Conjur, acquired by CyberArk in 2016. One thing could be very interesting for students here and anybody interested in cybersecurity, that Kevin's background goes back to the 1990s when he started the security firm At Stake, which was acquired by Symantec in 2004. So before we dive in and we learn and have a conversation with Kevin, I would love to just some housekeeping topics. Our amazing graduate students, Catherine Lee, will monitor the chat. We'll love to get questions from Kevin, but also we'll have time for you to unmute yourself and ask questions. So again, thank you, Kevin, and welcome everyone. I will spotlight you. So the first, question that I had, I would love for you to tell us what really motivated you to start. Can you tell a little bit about your journey and how you get to be an entrepreneur and why?
Yeah, certainly. The opening answer is, at some point, I think many of us who are entrepreneurs do it because we're unemployable. And it's maybe a joke and it's maybe not. I'd say that for me, you mentioned the fact that I got to be part of At Stake very early on. And in the late 1990s, I met one of the principals of that company as it was just being formed. And I was a kid. I was, I think, 18 years old. And she said, would you like to come be part of this in some way? And I said, well, yes. I had no idea what I was saying yes to. And I think for many of us in the role for a long time, startups are this nexus of building something new, being surrounded by the kinds of people who enjoy building things that are new and doing the kind of work that ends up being part of building companies and building hopefully generational companies at some point in your career. And also the chance to just wear a lot of hats. I spent a large portion of that early part of my career that you summarized working for people and being part of teams and having roles that gave me the opportunity to engage on sales or technology or marketing and eventually like a chief operating role. And we titled this the Relentless Itch of Curiosity because in some way I think my start was that I was never terribly satisfied by just doing a job. And there's nothing wrong with doing something and doing it very well. But the breadth of what one can do in starting a company is what appealed. My background is in philosophy. I came close to the PhD, went to UMass Amherst, Back in the early 2000s, I said, it's not the path that I want to take professionally. I don't want to be an academic forever as much as, well, I did. But philosophy and technology were very divergent paths, and I ended up going down the technology path. But that same curiosity, that same desire to understand really people, was what underpinned much of what ended up becoming a career. And to some degree, although there's a depth of specificity to being in cybersecurity and the kinds of companies that I've been part of or founded, it's that chance to work with people and understand where there is economic opportunity because there are problems to be solved, because there are things people are either very good at or very much not good at. That's the entrepreneurial journey for me. And that's that opportunity to say, let's just sort of see what's out there and what we might do.
I love it. And so that feeling of there are problems to be solved, and there are, and the idea of doing that together with the people you love to work with, and choosing the people. And of course, it's not always easy. And so the next couple of questions, really love to learn more about what do you enjoy most about after decades of doing this, and what you find most challenging.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the most enjoyable part is very much what I said. It's that you get this opportunity to do things that are different on your daily basis. And the arc of a company's trajectory, and I have not done the very late stage IPO CEO thing. That's not generally where the companies I've been part of have gone. But the phase that is at the very beginning, that is ideation, that is exploration, that's discovery, brings a certain kind of pleasure with it because everything is open. It's like any project that's new and complex. You get to ask a bunch of questions and talk to people who are way smarter than you are and ask them, why would you do this? Or what is it that makes you work that way? And then there's kind of the initial growth period when you're seeking, if you're in technology, certainly product market fit, and looking for signs that what you have has some ability to be not only interesting, but economically worthwhile, and that you can start to build a revenue model out of it and begin to think about returning something at some point in time to your shareholders. And then there's the real growth phase, like you've hit product market fit, and now you're starting to look for repeatability. And there's a lot of complexity that goes into running organizations as they start to scale from that initial inflection point in the industries I work in. That's usually somewhere in that $1 million or $2 million in revenue to, okay, how do we bring this thing up 10x? How do we get to 10 or 20 million in revenue? And then there's that kind of late stage, if you're a venture-backed business period, where you're thinking about exits. And that's a different process and a different set of considerations. And as a founding CEO, you get to be in these different places. That's phenomenal. And along the way, it's hard work, but it's hard work in a very privileged kind of way, because you're getting to do something that is hopefully, if you started it, intellectually interesting. But I think I would summarize what I like most as saying maybe something that a gentleman that I've worked a bit with and known for some time. There's a guy in Colorado now named Jerry Colonna, and Jerry had been one of the original partners of Union Square Ventures in New York City. And in the 1990s, Jerry was featured alongside Fred Wilson in Wired, and I think there's at least one or two New York Times articles about Jerry. And he had been dubbed like one of the princes of New York. And here's this guy who's making all this money in the sort of first .com boom. And Jerry decided that was not the path he wanted to take, and has since shifted his career. And it's worth finding his YouTube videos at some point and listening to him speak. He's tremendously intelligent, monstrously intelligent. And he tends to open most of his sessions now with, it might be Kipling, or it might be that he touches on some parable, but he's a great speaker. But he says the real goal, two things he says, I suppose, because I can't restrict myself to one. The real goal is good work done well for the right reasons, regardless of what industry you're in. I think that's right. And the other thing he says is the pleasure of being an entrepreneur is you get to build the kind of company you want to work for. And there are many different philosophies and approaches and purely economic reasons why one might become an entrepreneur, especially in technology, where the returns can be outsized. And that's important. And there's nothing wrong with being purely economically motivated, I suppose. But I think that the more interesting answer to your question, Francesca, is to say, you're building the kind of company you wish existed, you wish you worked for. You get to treat people in a certain way. And as I think about, what this organization is doing, there is a combination of those factors. The hard parts. The parts that are the least fun are often the most process focused. Not to say that you should not be detail oriented and be, a fan of that, especially as we talked about that kind of Series B product market fit to growth phase. That's all about repeatability and how repeatability drives revenue streams. But, I think when you get to a place where it just feels like, at least for me, it's now rote. That's the hard part. Like, how do you stay interested if you have whatever chemicals in your head make you want to go build companies, and now you're at this place, you're like, I'm just operating this thing, and there's a place for second acts, there's a place for change, and sometimes that changes yourself as the founder or co-founder or CEO. Sometimes it's for the organization, a new product, a new launch, a new market. Sometimes it's stepping away, and sometimes that's about saying, this entity that I have created. We talk in, I think, unhealthy ways about the companies we start sometimes in this industry. It's your baby. It's not. It's a company. People work for it. You work for it. And there might come a time when it's not the right thing for you to be part of anymore. And those are the correct ways, I think, to constantly be evaluating whether you have the right people around the proverbial table. And often I think that means finding a way to get rid of your own ego and say, this isn't me. And either I change or it changes, but something must change. And that is not the negative part, but that period of uncertainty, because nobody unfortunately comes to you, especially when you're in the CEO role, and says, sometimes they do. I've never been in that position, but sometimes, a board will sit down and say, it's time for you to go. But oftentimes, and it is a cliche to say that it's lonely to be in this role, but it is. And the loneliness isn't, you think it is. It's that when you're debating whether the time has come to change or do something, it rests on your shoulders.
Yeah.
And you convince people, but it's your decision. To lead is to decide, and you're making that call, and then you got to live with it.
Thank you. And to allow the same, just to piggyback on what you mentioned about the transitions, and what is your magic recipes for going through so many acquisitions, and if you want to provide also examples to the extent that you can provide, but something that could inspire.
I don't know about inspire. I wish it was a magic recipe, and if it was, we'd all follow it. It's not. When one of the companies that I was part of was a company called CloudLock, and we sold it to Cisco, and it was worth quite a bit. And it was one of the early cloud access security companies. I was not a founder. I think I was employee 10 or 12 or something. And I got to work with those guys. And that was an evolution around product and technology and place. But bluntly, it's also luck. And you can do everything right, but the confluence, the formula, if anything, is great product, great people, and great luck. And luck can be influenced by timing. It can be influenced by what others are doing. A lot of founders that I work with are incredibly focused on competition and incredibly fearful. But most startups don't die because they get taken out by a competitor. They implode, and they implode in a variety of ways. And so rather than saying what you should do, I don't know what you should do. I tell you what not to do. Don't run out of money. If you're fortunate enough to raise capital, don't run out of money. And that's easy. It's obvious. You're like, oh yeah, of course. But it's really tough when you're in that place and you're like, I don't know how to stop. And it sometimes entails making very difficult decisions. Like there is a wrong way to do a layoff or a reduction in force or strategic realignment or a recapitalization where you crush your investors down. And there's a way that you have to do it as a fiduciary to protect the organization, knowing how to handle those situations, how to avoid them ideally, but how to handle them and be honest with yourself. Because again, if it's your baby, you would do anything. If it's your company you work for, you can make more prudent decisions about how to manage it. So don't run out of money. Don't lose sight of your true north. Understand what it is that drives that business. And as businesses get bigger, especially if you're a CEO, a founder, probably any senior executive, but certainly at that level, a lot of people are going to tell you what you want to hear. And you can't really do anything about that. They're going to give you awards. I've got a bunch of stupid glass awards that say I'm the CEO of whatever. Well, that means anything. What matters in those circumstances is, why are we here? What is our fundamental reason for existence? How do we provide value? Understand that. And it might change, but understand it when it changes too. And with respect to, kind of exits, sometimes you exit because somebody comes to you and says, I'm going to give you this bucket of cash. Doesn't that sound nice? And you're like, yeah, it sounds nice. That's great. That's great when that happens. Most of the time it doesn't. So most of the time it's understanding where you're headed. Even if where you're headed is, I'm not certain, but I think we're going to take this company to IPO. I'm not certain, but I think we're going to take this company to a strategic acquisition. And then knowing in real time and an ongoing basis, what's going on around you. What are other companies doing? What's the market doing? Don't overreact. Don't listen to everything you read in the Journal or the Times or the Globe or TechCrunch or Wired or whatever you read. Be aware of it. But remember that everybody is reading that, and oftentimes great value comes from iconoclastic responses to things. And so know when to be iconoclastic and bold and when to set that course. You can't do it every day, or else you're just seen as sort of out of your mind. But understand kind of like what that is. And so, I've seen exits where it's with the cloud thing, we sold that business. You know what? That business was worth $300 million to a degree. I mean, with all due respect to the founders, and they're brilliant and they've gone to do brilliant things. The market was right. We sold it to Cisco, and this is public information now. We sold it to Cisco because that was the best technology in that space that had not already had an exit or was so small that it wouldn't fit. And I think we had 20 plus million in annual recurring revenue when we sold it. We got almost 10x what revenue was. That was about being in the right place at the right time. And as smart as Gil and Ron and Zahi, the three people who founded that company, were, the market had to be right too. Cisco had to be right. And they built relationships over time, and they were building technologies, brilliant founders. But there was a degree of luck. And that is something you can't create, but you can watch for and react to. And sometimes that luck is not a 300 or 500 or $1 billion exit. Sometimes it's much smaller. And I went through this, when we did a private equity exit on my last company, strong foundations in that business. And we found the right partners to come in and say, the next level of growth is going to look like this, and we're going to make sure that you get there. And it was the right time. And it was not a $1 billion exit, but it wasn't needed to be at that moment. And it was understanding what is the dynamic that exists between this company and the market, and who might be able to get us there. And what does a win look like? Not just a capital W win, maybe a lowercase w win. How do I do that? And that ability to differentiate is, I think, the formula. Don't run out of money. Keep your options open. Know what your options are. Be realistic about them, and ignore the noise.
That's awesome. I also love, don't overreact to the news. I love that, pay attention, right? But just be, don't be emotionally reacting to what you hear. Regarding that, I think, luck is definitely, we know it's always a big part of this, at the right time. What was the importance of network? How do you know when and how to network? How we know connect to the right people? And how do you learn to connect with the right people, and when? And so, do you have any lessons about, not necessarily only regarding acquisitions or exit strategies, but in general?
Well, you can't fake it. That's not a skill that you can teach someone. I think that if you are a person who wants to start things, then one of the first things I think I said in response to my long-winded way to your first question was, what are some of these stories? Being just really interested in people with no thought towards how that person can help you. Just being sincerely, and I mean it sincerely, interested in the people around you, in what makes them tick, in what their hopes are, what their strengths are, what their fears are, and continually nurturing. Like, I forget how many thousands of people I'm connected to on LinkedIn. And that's great, but I don't talk to thousands of people I'm a normal person. I go to bed at night. I wake up in the morning. I have a job. So, whom can I speak to? How can I just sort of stay aware of like the people who are in this network of people, and not the ones that I think are always like, oh, that's the mover and shaker, that's the buyer, but just the people around you who, like right now, a great example. I spoke today with a gentleman who is now working for a small managed service provider and is very, very bright around cybersecurity. And we were talking about some things that I'm doing now in sort of my post-Greathorn life, and ideating around some things that might come to fruition. That guy was a customer in 2015 who emailed into, at the time, the barely out of its infancy, not even, company that was Greathorn, became customer number one. And here we are almost 10 years later, and I'm talking about ways I might work with this individual. I would never have been able to predict that when I got a cold email from that person saying, hey, we're interested in your product. And I was like, we don't have a product yet, but that's great. Yeah, we'll sell that to you. And we did. And then we scrambled and started building. So like, just maintain those relationships. And, I think it goes back to something I said a moment ago, which is be really humble. Do not listen to the people who tell you how great you did. Don't be there. It doesn't matter. Pay more attention to the connections you can build and the ways that you can be helpful and of service to others. Founding CEOs mythologize. Do not believe the mythology you build about yourself. Do not buy into it. It's marketing. It's important, maybe. Like you read this really nice thing about me. I don't think of myself that way. No great founder I know thinks of themselves as anything. I'm not saying I'm a great founder. I'm just saying that no founder, and especially no great founder, really spend a lot of time worrying about themselves. They think about, what can I do? How can I solve problems? How can I be helpful? And the rest kind of follows. Occasionally you have to make a hard call. Occasionally you have to be forceful. Occasionally you have to be a jerk. But it's very occasional. And really most of your time should be, what can I do for people around me? And, that sounds, again, sort of hackneyed, but it's not. It is how you build a network that is useful when you need it.
Yes, great. And I know I collected a few questions before the meeting, but I want to make before the call, if anybody has the itch to ask a question right now, you can do it, because I also want to pivot one. No, here, Nick, go ahead. Floor is yours.
Okay. Hey, how's it going, Kevin? It's great to meet you. I'm a finance major who was recently finance accounting, but has just declared a CS minor with about a year left. So a bit of a quarter life crisis, but I'm happy that I did it. My question for you is, where do you see automation changing the game for startups? And how do you see automation startups blossoming over the next decade?
Yeah, near and dear to my heart, I'm working on one. I think what you're going to see is that we are in a moment of generational change in how, where, and when we all work, but especially knowledge workers work. And I think that is creating both opportunity, but also challenge. And one of the things that's creating for challenge is that companies in the middle market, the SMB and middle market in particular, are struggling to have the budgetary ability right now, maybe for a while, maybe not. I don't know. I don't prognosticate about the public markets, to hire. And so automation is a force multiplying tool. And so, we saw this, if you go all the way back and you think about when we started automating the industrial lines of how automotive stuff worked, and you get all of the Kanban stuff that comes out of that. I'm sure you guys, are exposed. that was about automation from a machinery perspective so that you could move towards just-in-time creation of things. What it really was a generational shift in how we created physical durable goods. We are now, I believe, at a moment when things that are more intellectual in nature, like software or some of the things that we do around human capital management, et cetera, is undergoing and has been for a while the same kind of evolution that we saw happen in industrial manufacturing 50, 60 years ago. And so the companies that are startups that are right now coming out, and I don't mean that everyone should go say, I'm using ChatGPT. It's a tool. But the idea that, artificial intelligence, which is maybe for the first time, as a guy who has a CS background, I would have for a long time rolled my eyes and said, that's not AI, that's ML, maybe starting to become real. That is where there is opportunity to say, can I take the same problems for the most part that we've always dealt with? How can I create product that is intellectual in nature, that is knowledge based in nature? And can I now do something to multiply a more limited resource that organizations are applying to whatever that domain is? In cybersecurity, the work could go in a bunch of different directions around the things that cybersecurity analysts do, but I think you're going to see it happening. I'm already seeing it happen. Marketing copy is being written by ChatGPT for companies. And of course, there will be additional evolution in that space. In sales, we're seeing people starting to parse sales calls and applying some of the automation technologies to say, can I write a script for that next sales call your person's going to make that is significantly more likely to result in a deal? These are areas where automation, because it's based now on analysis, is making a difference. And the last thing I'll say, it's a long-winded answer again, I'm sorry, but in the same sense that we think about things like industrial control and just-in-time manufacturing, we're about reducing the amount of dead space being used in warehouses holding goods that might never be needed. And we said, okay, can we get there? Here, I think the equivalent or the analogous change that automation is bringing is, can I find a way to not have people doing a bunch of superfluous work? Can I, at the moment that I need something, rely on automation to take a much more lean force and get the same intellectual output that I could have had I had 10 or 15 people, or maybe couldn't have mythical man month, et cetera.
Thank you. And there is a, thank you, Nick. There is a question. Namruth, you raise your hand.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello, Kevin. Thank you for coming. So I had a question regarding competition. You just touched upon it a little bit in your previous answer, but how do you think of competition in terms of, other bigger cybersecurity companies? They have so much more resources and experience and manpower and, everything more than a startup can have, and trust with customers since they've been here for quite some time. So how do you think of competition, and does that come with experience, or how do you compete with someone who has so much more resources than you do?
At 8 a.m. this morning, I was coming back from a meeting down in Providence, and it's 86 degrees, which is a little strange for New England in mid-April. And so I rode my motorcycle and I was merging onto 95. And as I was merging onto 95, there were some large 16-wheelers, some semis coming up and down the highway. And it would have been very difficult for me to imagine how I could, merge onto that if I didn't have the ability to twist that throttle and go 5 times faster than those things can accelerate or decelerate. Competition is a benefit. And this is I dislike the metaphor I'm about to use. I've heard it said, and so I will repeat it, but I dislike it because I think it's crass. But more startups die of suicide than homicide. You're probably not going to get crushed by your competition. Maybe. It's far more likely that you will get distracted and delayed and do the wrong things. So your ability to pivot, to manipulate what you do with speed is your biggest advantage. And also, I don't know how many folks on the call have worked in really large organizations. I have, through acquisition. Just getting a meeting on the books can take 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, a startup can build a product, especially today. Agility, clarity of purpose. Those are your advantages.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a question that, you mentioned, cybersecurity. So what are some, unique characteristics of, competition in some, and being an entrepreneur and cybersecurity compared to others?
Yeah. Cybersecurity is an interesting space because it's both full of noise. The average 1,000-person company, which is small, it's a small mid-market, has 70 cybersecurity products from 35 different vendors. So not all of those are providing tremendous value. It's a space that's incredibly noisy and also incredibly important. It sits at the confluence of regulatory pressures. And by the way, we could have an entire session talking about how regulatory change can influence businesses both positively and negatively. It also is an area that gets a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And so people spend a lot of money and think about it. There are, a set of things you can do as we get into, we won't hear, but get into the specifics of the domain and the things that need to occur. Most startups, not all, occasionally there's revolutionary change. I think ChatGPT and what Sam is building at Sam Altman's building at OpenAI, et cetera, represent maybe generational change. And that generational change is kind of like what we saw in the early days of the public internet, maybe the advent of microcomputers in the home in the mid to late 1980s. I think we're starting to see it. I don't think ChatGPT is the equivalent. I think what it represents is the equivalent. But for the most part, it's better, faster, cheaper, right? And so if you can do something, especially better, where you find a novel way of solving problems, cybersecurity is a moving target. People also mythologize cybersecurity, and we think about it as though we're somehow very different from the rest of software. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But if you can solve for the problems that result in the failure states, which is unique, maybe, if you think about most companies, if I go start a sales call recording company, and LinkedIn's been rife with Chorus versus Gong, these two big companies that did basically call recording and sales optimization. One of them did phenomenally well. One did pretty well. And the differences between those, they were both playing in a commoditized space and they were challenging each other and thinking about this in certain ways. But one outsold the other, more or less. The technology was not the answer. Cyber is usually, not always, a technological challenge. It has to be couched in the language of business. Can I help you make money or save money? Can I reduce risk, or can I meet a regulatory requirement? The 4 fundamental reasons to start a business. But the issues that go into the domain specifically often require that you be better at something, better at detecting threat, better at analyzing files for malware, better at protecting email systems than anyone who's out there now, or faster or cheaper.
Thank you. I know that Zara, I think you had, Zara, you want to ask the question person or me to read it? It's the same.
Hi, sure, yeah. So I was late to the call because I thought it's Pacific time zone. I'm alumni of the Seattle campus. So yeah, at what stage do you think someone can leave their 9-to-5 and become a full-time entrepreneur, and with the inflation and economy being the way they are?
Yeah, there are 2 parts to my answer. And the first is, personal economics or personal economics. And opportunity is unequally distributed in the world, but in the United States in particular. And, there are just atrocious statistics about the funding from venture capital for women, for people of color, for minorities of any type. And so there is a different answer, and there should not be, if you are a white male in your 20s or 30s versus others who might have a lesser opportunity to go do it. And that should not be the case. And personal economics then play into that. There are folks who found companies who come from generational wealth. And really the answer is then whenever you want, right? Because there's nothing at stake. And then there are people who have brilliant ideas, but they also have obligations to family, to others that can preclude it. So I would never tell somebody, you should do it, which is the received wisdom. So there's an answer that is in part when the ability exists for you as the entrepreneur. However, assuming that you're like, I can live for 90 days or 180 days, usually a first fundraise when you're ready will take you 3 to 6 months. Most fundraisers take 6 months, but 3 to 6 months. Some go faster. A serial entrepreneur has a different experience from a new entrepreneur. But if you can say, like, I can do that, there is something magical for some reason about dedicating yourself full time. And entrepreneurship should not be. This is the mythology of the venture capitalist that says you jump off the cliff and you assemble the parachute on the way down. To which I say that's really easy when you're sitting on personal net wealth in the 7 or 8 figures. However, there is also something true about that, which is that at some level, the time is always now. If you have an idea that is worthwhile and you don't have personal economic catastrophe that happens if you're wrong, in which case, maybe that's not the best situation to be in, and you're in the situation you're in, you respond to it the way you respond to it. But if you can do that and say, I can take a flyer on this one, the time is always now. You cannot time the market in the same way that you can't time the market for stock trading, right? So the economy is rough. But let me tell you, it's a phenomenal time to start a business, because the people that you can bring in to maybe join your venture who are undergoing transition are people that you might not get in boom times. I'm starting a new company right now. It's in stealth. I talk in great detail about it, but I'm talking to people at pre-revenue, pre-product, and I'm a repeat entrepreneur, so I have some advantages that may not exist for the first timer, but I'm talking to people who have been laid off by multi-billion-dollar companies and are embittered and saying, I'm not going to go work for another Fortune 500 right now. I've seen how they treat me. You get the opportunity to maybe get in front of those people and work with those people or raise capital. And if you raise venture and you ask about, I think in your email on funding, my tips on funding would take a session to themselves, but in quick synopsis, fundraising is a binary. You are either fundraising or you're not. The fundamental thing that most entrepreneurs get wrong, especially first-time entrepreneurs, is they start having coffee with investors. They have a few meetings, they talk to a few people, and before you know it, you've backed your way into this financing activity. It must be a deliberate choice. And when you do it, you are throwing a giant lever. You're like, I'm now in fundraise mode, and I'm going to have 100 conversations in the next 72 hours. And you must be ready to make that happen, because finance in the venture capital world, at least in my experience, is very much a FOMO game. It should not be. It is stupid. I have a bunch of thoughts, and I'm probably insulting a venture capitalist on the phone, but it is a dumb way to do business, where you just kind of wait and see what everyone else does, but there's an element of that. So the tip for fundraising is you prepare yourself, and then you do it as a thing that you do in a finite period of time with a great degree of focus, and you will know very quickly. Do not let it dole itself out over 6 months, because the longer you go, VCs talk to one another, the more they say, well, I looked at them, I passed. And because VCs are risk functions, basically, they're like, well, I'm going to pass too, because you saw something I didn't. And then that starts to play on itself and becomes exponentially more difficult as time passes, versus I'm in. And so you really want to condense that process. The rest of it, the diligence process, not a series seed round maybe, but the diligence process, the work that goes into that's what takes the time. But getting conviction early from people, I don't know if we'll ever have an opportunity to do it, but I would be happy to spend an entire session on how to actually think about fundraising. What do you say? What goes in a deck? But the real thing is you're building energy and conviction when there is nothing there, which means as an entrepreneur, it's a bet on you. And so you need to bring founder market fit to the table. Why am I the right person to do this business? And how do I convince you of that?
Great. Thank you, Zara, for your question. Thank you, Kevin. I'll ask a question because I know that there will be more, and I want to make sure that we have time. So I'm curious about you mentioned how difficult it is sometimes, especially we're talking about acquisition and going through exit strategies and that transition. And it's great that great time now to hiring regarding the team management and people management, especially again, not necessarily when you're thinking about exiting. How do you, and today about working from home and flexibility, what are some strategies, some or something that you worked for you?
It works for
do
me.
you manage? I mean, there is a whole session about human resource. You know, I understand. So it's something that
You know, again, it's the unequal distribution of opportunity. The single best thing that you can do is hire really competent people who are really good at their field, who also want to work at a company at your scale. The classic mistake that many first-time CEOs who are technical make, especially in software companies, is they go and they hire a sales VP early on, and that person has come out of, I mean, it used to be you'd say Oracle, and I don't know what you'd say today, but they brought this person and they're really, really charismatic and they speak really well, and they should be, and they've driven $500 million in revenue over the last 5 years. And they come in and they completely flop because that person's skills are utterly ill-suited to the task at hand. So, when you think about team, you have to say, well, first, what is the set of requirements that will get me from A to B, where B is probably your next round of financing? And financing should not be the goal of a company. It is a mechanism to measure progress along the path. So if you're like, I'm starting something and I need to go raise $1 million. Well, to raise $1 million, I'm going to need early customers. To have early customers, I need product. To have product, I need engineers. I'm not technical, perhaps. So I need someone who can help me run that part of the business. So I need a technical co-founder. What kind of person do I want? Well, I want a technical co-founder who, in that case, can hire and manage people and also write code. Or I'm doing a consumer business. I need someone who is a genius at how to get virality into my business, because there's going to be a network effect. And that K-factor network effect is something I need someone who's done it before, or I've done it before, because I wasn't, obviously, but I was an influencer. And so whatever. So you figure out, like, what are the things you need to accomplish? And the people you bring in have to both have the skill and the desire to do it. I often say when I manage people that the three questions I ask are, does this person want to do the job? Does this person know how to do the job? And is this person competent at it? If the answer to any of those questions is no, you've got the wrong person. But someone who knows how to do the job, is actually able to do the work, has the skills required, not just the knowledge of what it should be. And that's the hard one to differentiate, right? Someone can say all the right things, they know how it should go, but they can't actually do it themselves. And past performance is often the indicator of ability there. And then they want to, and you've got to suss those things out. You've got to manage those things. You've got to think about those things. You've got to bolster people when they're feeling at their lowest. So much of what we do as founders and CEOs is not about cracking whips. We're not managers. This isn't middle management in the 1980s where you're driving people to do certain performative things. You're looking for people who are like, I really just want to move this needle, and you're figuring out how to make that happen for them. And if they can't, or they don't want to, or they don't know what it is, that's a you problem. You brought the wrong person, and then you figure out your exit strategy to replace that person and bring the right people in.
Thank you, Camille. I know that Zara had a follow-up question. When you saw, where do we find investors? I mean, it's a general question, but maybe you're going to react to that.
It kind of depends on the kind of business that you're running. I only really know about venture-backed businesses in this regard. Non-venture-backed businesses typically will take money from friends and family, and they'll do it in angel rounds, and they have to be accredited investors, and you go and figure out how you can run that process. There are syndicates that you can work with. Most major cities have angel syndicates. Most technology subsectors have angel syndicates, where individual investors might put in small amounts of money, and the syndicate will vote as a block and invest as a block. I don't have a ton of experience with them. I've never done angel, I've either never personally angel invested or been invested in by angels, really. Occasionally you'll find that. If you're in an industry or you have relationships in industry, founders who have had successful exits often look to turn large fortunes into small ones. So they angel invest, and you can go and find those people and get money from them. If you're in the venture world, there's a laundry list of potential venture capital firms, and you can find them. Crunchbase is one area that you can find, like companies kind of like yours who invested in them. Certainly you can start to get exposure. If you're doing something in the technology space that can be appealing to an accelerator program, I have mixed feelings about accelerator programs, despite my involvement with Techstars, and they were very good to us. But they can be very helpful, and they can often help you get in front of large numbers of investors in their traditional demo days. In the United States, the major ones are Y Combinator and Techstars, and then there's a variety of somewhat smaller ones. Those can be good ways to get there. You're often giving up sizable equity to do it. And you're going through a program, and that program is going to expect you to behave in a certain way and look like a certain type of founder and do certain things. But you still get a demo day and get in front of a bunch of founders. There's a bunch of strategies around how you reach out to venture capital firms. It's almost always a bad idea to cold pitch them. So you're usually looking to build your network, going back to Francesca's question, so that you can be introduced. This is something that I'll occasionally do, where I know a founder, I know a team, and I'll say, hey, I know as you're raising this round, these people, and I'm happy to make an introduction for you. And, that then is more powerful because I'm a successful CEO. And then as a successful CEO, when I say, hey, so-and-so, I'm working with this person and they're doing this, it sounds really interesting. Would you be interested in talking to them? It's an implicit stamp of approval, and they might take that meeting where they wouldn't if it was a cold pitch. So there's a lot of strategy there. If it's outside of that and you're looking for more traditional investors, I'm not sure how that works as well, but there are ways that SBC can help you put together business plans and get traditional financing, et cetera.
And I want to add here, thank you, Cami, because for the students and the fellows here, for alumni, I mean, really for everybody, there is Northeastern University has an ecosystem to support. There are student accelerators, IDEA, there is Mosaic, there is the Venture Mentoring Network, where you can work. That really is a good way to help network and to people work with people who have experience in either with a specific challenge that you have. Maybe they're not in your industry, but they can connect you with somebody as you're looking to for the next fundraising opportunity, or you can connect with somebody who has experience in marketing. Or so the VMN Venture Mentoring Network is definitely get in touch with me if you want to know. I can share can connect with a few people at Northeastern that you can that could be good resources, students, for alumni, for the fellows as well. So I know we're almost at time, and just make sure that if there aren't a question here, because I wanted to there was a question somebody asked. I have a company trying to grow. It was only 2 people. They were trying to hire, and they were having a hard time hiring today because of people asking to be remote. There is that expectation to be extremely flexible, and so did you have to did you have this challenge? How do you make sure to motivate? Then there is also another question that another student asked about equity. Sometimes they ask for equity, and it can be a challenge. Are there other ways that you can engage that can keep people motivated? So anything that worked for you?
Yeah. Two good questions. Look, I opened a 20,000 square foot office on March 3rd of 2020, and we had spent a year building it out. The building had put about $3 million into the space. We put a sizable amount of capital in. We were paying, I think, $85,000 a month on the lease, and I sent everybody home at the time you would expect, and we never reopened it. We got very fortunate in that a large company came in and bought out the building, and we got out of the lease about a year later. But I spent almost $1 million on rent that we never used. There's nothing wrong with being remote, unless you have like physics in your business and you have to be in a space, maybe certain kinds of science where you need a bench, certain kinds of robotics where you need to be able to build things and have engineers working on actual physical goods. If you're writing software, why would you not? And that doesn't mean you don't ever meet those people. It just means that you're more intentional about that time. And if somebody is going to be challenged to like be productive, you're going to find that out anyways. You got the wrong person. Remote is in large ways a benefit. It's also good for the environment. I'm maybe betraying my own leanings, but we don't need to get in our cars and drive everywhere every day for no reason other than to sit there and do the same thing you can do at home. And people are more productive and happier if they're not forced to go do that for however long, especially in Boston with its traffic issues. So I'm a big fan of it. I think you get people together intentionally once a month, once a week, whatever, but do not rush to go get an office. It is the cargo cult of business, as opposed to, unless there's a specific reason you need it, something that's a benefit. You're just going to spend a lot of money on real estate that you can probably use better in other ways. It's back to your second question, Francesca, or whomever asked it. Equity is a sign of confidence in your business. If an employee, I mean, I believe that everyone should be given equity. It is a tool in the bag that you can pull out and use with a vesting schedule. Usually it's a 1-year cliff and then 4 years total to vest in tech. That's great because now that person has an incentive to stay beyond their cash, because as a startup, you're not paying at the top of the market unless you're incredibly fortunate. So, like that's really the thing. I'd be like, go after equity, use it. Don't give away crazy amounts. There are standards for how much you give. And, we can talk about that in different industries. But, an individual contributor might get 1/10 of a point of equity. A senior VP might get 1.25 points. Somewhere in between is probably most of your team. And every financing round, if you're taking venture, you're going to have a 10% option pool. Don't let them push you up. That's stupid. But you get it to 10%. And then you allocate that to the people you're bringing in. That is a mechanism for making those people not only stay, but also feel incentivized to push for the same thing you're pushing for.
This is great. And I think with Zara's input, we could conclude by, Zara's question. Sorry, I think I'm mispronouncing your name. Yeah, Zara. What type of person could be a good entrepreneur? So if maybe just as a closing remarks, to some, high level attributes of a good entrepreneur, and we can close here as a good recap. Thank you, Zara, for the question.
Thank you. I'll try to bring it back to what I said at the beginning, which is that someone who's curious, someone who's maybe a little bit crazy, it is incredibly difficult to be a first-time entrepreneur in particular, to be an entrepreneur in general. It's long hours, it's hard work. It's not a great way to make money. It really isn't. Like if you've got the skills to be an entrepreneur, you have the ability to go make money for a lot less work somewhere else with a lot less headache. And so you end up doing it. Maybe we all start because we have the seductive dream of being multimillionaires, billionaires, or whatever, or changing the world. And those are legitimate reasons to maybe get into it. But 6 years into a 10-year-long startup run, when you haven't slept much for the last, like half decade, the glamour kind of falls away. And look, I'm a normal person, I think. And so when I was first-time founder of something, it's like, or maybe even before that, I was like, I'm a VP, I'm a CEO. Who cared about that? My mom. My mom thought that was really cool. Nobody else cares. You're not that important for the most part. So do it because you have to. Be an entrepreneur because there is no other way that you can pull together the kinds of people you want to work with, build the kind of company that you would want to work for, do the work that you think needs to be done, and let the rest of that, status, economics, whatever, those are ancillary. They barely merit attention, honestly, because I believe you get one go at this and you're going to spend your time doing something. And there are people who probably are on this call who feel differently and for whom economic success is a driver. And there are legitimate reasons why that might be, and there are egotistical reasons why that might be. But I think that the best entrepreneurs I see have to be entrepreneurs. And it manifests not just in business, but everywhere in their life.
Wonderful. Thank you. I loved it. I hope, well, we are at time, and I want to thank you, Kevin, for your time. This was a great conversation. I would really, really appreciate. I got a lot of notes, and I know that our students and alumni and fellows will really appreciate it. We'll share the recordings. So be in touch. We again, our lab, but in general, Northeastern is here to support you. And we learned a lot, and we wish you best of luck in the new venture.
A lot of fun. Thanks all. Bye for now.
Yes. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.